I'm very happy to be joined by Ross Higgins, who's a researcher at Bellingcat, one of the publications that did a lot of deep diving into the strange world of 1xBet, tennis, the sports betting website and conglomerate that you have seen written about here on Bounces and their recent deals with several big tennis bodies and the ATP Challenger Tour, the Dallas Open, and Billie Jean King Cup. Ross, you did a bunch of work, and you and your collaborators and teammates at Josimar and Bellingcat on this topic. I'm just curious. First, how did 1xBet come onto Bellingcat's radar?
We receive a lot of kind of exploratory emails asking us if we want to collaborate on things. Um, Elliot Higgins, who's the founder of Bellingcat, received an email from Philippe Auclair, who's a sports broadcaster, writer, musician who does a lot of things. And he was asking if we'd potentially want to look into issues surrounding football. So Yosimar is a website and magazine that looks exclusively into football and corruption and different issues around football.
Hmm.
They're the only publication of their type in the world. So um, I kind of took over from Elliot because he doesn't know anything about football. And I went to meet Philippe in London and we spoke for a couple of hours and we went over a range of subjects, including 1xBet. That really interested me. So we arranged a further meeting in Amsterdam with a bunch of Bellingcat researchers and a bunch of journalists who work with Yosimar. And we kind of landed on 1xBet. It's an interesting organization and website. The first thing that kind of piqued our interest was the fact that this is a Russian founded Cypriot company that seems to be sponsoring a whole bunch of huge sports teams. So
Yeah.
PSG, Barcelona, they briefly sponsored some Premier League teams. They've sponsored the whole of Syria, which is the main football league in Italy.
Mm.
So they're big players, and we were looking into finding out open source angles. So we do open source investigations, which means we take publicly available data and see if we can turn it into a story that's of interest to the public. So really how this came about was we're all thinking of this angle and then we just decided to look at the website. And what we saw were just endless streams of people playing football and weird games of basketball and one-on-one football in cages in what appeared to be quite seedy warehouses and sports centers. With the knowledge that they were sponsoring these major teams, we thought it would be interesting to look into this. So that was really the starting point of this.
Yeah, and it is, and I think that's the what's the huge contrast here is these very shiny, bright, high, reputation, valuable, popular sporting entities, these various huge European football clubs, soccer clubs, and versus this really bizarre sort of, it almost reminded me of like most like a webcam ring or something, basically. It's just people that, and I think people usually think of webcam rings as being, sex or pornography related. But this is people playing in some sort of closed room, playing really lackluster soccer with each other, over and over again for a betting audience. And that's the sort of audience they train. And there's, like you said, there's different sports. The most bizarre one, I think, is the bench football, I think it's called, where it's two people sitting at what looks like almost like a small picnic table, but with a transparent top, and they're just kicking a
Yeah,
ball underneath on the ground and not moving and trying to kick it between each other's legs basically to score goals. It's just the most like it seems like a boring game to play in person, much less to watch someone play it online and bet money on it. It just seems like, yeah, it's this weird sort of sweatshop-esque use of these workers. I don't know if you, I guess some of them probably are athletes, if you want to call them that, ones who may have some soccer different training. I don't know where they came from, but one of the things that Bellingcat found is where they are. I guess where these things are based and some of the buildings and structures that host these events.
yes. Yeah, so there were kind of two stages to this. So initially, um, what we did was all of the stuff that's in the article that's on the Bellingcat website is video taken from a 24-hour period.
Mm.
So the important thing to note is that I think there were in excess of 1,000 games that they streamed in one day
Wow.
over a 24-hour period. Um, and we only looked at the soccer games. There was a floorball game that we looked at. But obviously, for the purpose of the article, we were interested in these warehouse games. So we got one of our tech experts to rip all that video from the website over a 24-hour period. And then we went through the kind of dispiriting exercise of watching all these games over a period of some weeks. And we set ourselves the task of geolocating these games. So what that involves is you look for little clues in the video. So it might
Mm.
be a banner in the background. It might be any physical features of the warehouse or leisure center that they're playing in, and then trying to tie that up through a bunch of different methods, reverse image searching, um, sort of taking the words from the banners in the background and trying to tie them to local companies,
Mhm.
the markings on the floor, just anything we can find, and then seeing if we can find the corresponding location elsewhere online. So these tended to be based in Russia. There was a basketball court in Ukraine, which is really strange because it's at a time when Russia was at war with Ukraine, which it obviously still is.
Mhm.
Um, that was in Kyiv, and there were a couple in Belarus
Yeah.
as well. What's interesting about that is 1xBet has been in significant legal trouble in Russia uh,
Yeah.
over unpaid tax. It's obviously banned outright in Ukraine and across all of Europe, actually. Um, and 1xBet claimed that they're not a Russian company, and yet these streams are for the most part coming from Russia. So we just wanted to map out a network of these locations visually for the reader to help them to explain the scale of these games, to visualize the potential of exploitation that was going on in these games. Because even though you see some skills in these games, what you're mostly seeing are quite bored, tired people playing
Yeah.
football over and over again.
Yeah.
Um, and
I,
also things like, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask about that because you used the word when you were talking about when you were started talking about the sporting events that you were watching it or reviewing for this research as you called them dispiriting. And just for people who haven't seen, people who may have seen the article and saw some clips and some highlights, quote unquote, of these sporting events. Can you explain what makes watching this footage so dispiriting and why it's so yeah, it is just glum in this way that I've never really seen sports quite be before.
Yeah, it's slightly difficult to explain, but it's like watching sport with all the fun and competitive element taken out of it. It's
Hmm.
very much you're watching it to gamble on. These games have a very fast turnover. They're only short games of football. You're seeing the same players turn up in different games.
Yeah, like 10 minutes long or
Uh,
so. Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously there's no commentary on the vast majority of these games. There's no referee in most of them. There's nothing that you'd enjoy from sports. And also, as you alluded to, you've got this kind of webcam, security cam footage that gives it this kind of surveillance quality. So it's the feeling of watching, a, I don't know, Squid Game through a camcorder
Mm,
or something. It's just there's nothing there's nothing really competitive about it. It's just all about generating that money and a quick turnover so they can get as many people to gamble on this as they possibly can.
Yeah, no, it definitely it did have a I did think of Squid Game as well too. That sort of dystopian feel of just watching these people trapped in this warehouse playing this game. And I guess this is something that you in your research said could have brought it up a lot during the pandemic too, when there was a real halt on global live sports almost everywhere. I remember Belarus actually was one of the countries where a few things did carry on, and there was some, national level tennis tournament or something that was like the one sporting tennis event in the world. And I don't know if it was April 2020 or some other
Mm.
time of peak shutdown. Belarus did persist briefly. Yeah, but it seems to be a relic of those sorts of sad times and still going. And this is not the first, odd thing that 1xBet has done. I mean, there were been investigations by other people. The Sunday Times did a story, I think, as far back as 2019, I believe, 2018,
Mhm.
2019, writing, and that got them banned in the UK, or just whatever, discredited, or no longer legally allowed to operate in the UK. And like you said, in most of Europe, the countries where 1xBet does operate legally is a very small list, and not what we think of as primary markets for these big prestigious sporting institutions. When you knock out all of Europe, all of North America, a lot of Asia, it seems like. When I was looking at 1xBet on Twitter, just seeing the recent social media mentions and who was talking about them, the majority of posts I found are for people in Ghana complaining about not getting paid by 1xBet for their winnings. That seemed to be
Yeah,
one of their main customer bases. And so it's just odd that, yeah, these big global shiny sporting objects would be pairing with this company that seems to operate really in the shadows in a lot of ways.
yeah, it's particularly sleazy because their markets are increasingly they've kind of been shoved out of Europe um, because the gambling authorities are aware of who they are and they don't necessarily want to be associated with them. But what we've seen is kind of a push towards the global south. So Africa, Latin America, India, Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And they have corresponding sites for each of these countries. So what they're doing is taking from um, some of the poorest people whatever they can. It's all about creating gambling addicts in these parts of the world where they can escape the the legislation that you might get in say Western Europe or
Yeah.
the United States. So again, uh, that leaves quite a bad taste in your mouth, especially as you've said when they're sponsoring the Champions League winners. They're sponsoring these huge, rich clubs in Western Europe. Um, so to see that kind of uh, to see that kind of supply chain and just spell it out and say, okay, you've got Barcelona or PSG at the top, and then you've just got these warehouse games, and you've got gamblers in Western Africa, and you know, it's just it's just quite disturbing when you can see the whole picture.
Yeah, it's strange, and some of the early things that have been reported about. I think one of the things that you guys reported on Bellingcat was some underage, potentially athletes, some teenage girls who were in one of the games that was being streamed for betting, and it wasn't even clear necessarily if these girls even knew that their game was being streamed for betting, or the parents would have known that this local
Mm.
youth league was being there. And then, one of the other things, and I think the Sunday Times article was about sort of a topless blackjack dealers or something on some sort of virtual stream. They called a
Mm.
Pornhub casino was the term they used, and maybe also some cockfighting that was also available to bet on the 1x bet site. So this is really, really sort of seedy underground stuff in a lot of ways. And I guess my sort of lasting question for you, and you can, philosophize wherever you want on this, but why do these brands that I think people think of as reputable, that we would hope to think would be reputable and have some standards and shouldn't be desperate for money, why did all these big, European soccer clubs, these tennis tournaments, keep partnering with this company, 1xBet? Why don't they feel a need to do better than this?
Okay, so I guess I'd say two things to this. First of all, they like money.
Yeah.
and 1xBet can give them money. Um, and secondly, they don't feel accountable to anybody. So whenever we write an article, we send rights and replies to everybody. This was quite unusual in that nobody wanted to speak to us about this, except for the creator of Sub Soccer, who wasn't happy that his game was being used on this gambling website without
That's the
permission.
seated soccer. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the seated soccer. So we wrote to Barcelona, and they wrote back to us incredibly arrogantly and just said, "We don't wish to comment on this. We don't feel we owe you an explanation." In other words, um, PSG, who are arguably the biggest team in Europe, one of the most successful, didn't bother to send us a reply. If you go onto 1xBet's website, or certainly at the time, you had a number of these clubs talking publicly about how they were really proud to be doing this deal with 1xBet, and talking to a representative from 1xBet called Alex Summers.
Mm.
We found no evidence that Alex Summers even existed.
Mm.
He was using the headshot of a CNN journalist.
Oh, wow.
When we tried to contact him, no response. When the article came out, suddenly he disappeared and was replaced by somebody else.
Mm.
Now we're doing we're doing open source investigations. We're doing this from our own laptops. We're doing more due diligence on 1xBet than any of these sporting institutions. So it's either incompetence on their part or they don't care
Yeah.
because they know that nobody's going to punish them for this.
Yeah.
So those are the reasons that I would speculatively give to you.
No, that all adds up, and I hadn't heard that part about the CNN reporter. That's pretty remarkable. And yeah, there is the name that I'm curious to check the names that are on the more recent tennis press releases they've trotted out, see if those could possibly be real or imaginary people as well, sort of Anglophone names they've come up with. I guess thank you for your time here, Ross. I just last thing, if you can sort of for people who don't, who maybe this is their first time hearing of Bellingcat, and you guys do a lot of very varied work, most of it, beyond sports, and a lot of more, serious topics potentially than sports, you could say. Although I think I believe in taking sports and its integrity seriously. So, what can you just tell a bit about Bellingcat and what it is and how people, I don't know if there's other opportunities for collaboration or cooperation, because I know you guys are philosophically very open to yeah, these publicly sourced open source sorts of investigations.
We are indeed, and we're a investigative collective, and we've been going for 11 years. We're
Hmm.
based in the Netherlands, and we use open source techniques to look into a range of subjects. So we look into conflict monitoring. That's probably what we're best known for. Um, we do a lot of stuff on the various conflicts around the world. We have a financial investigations team, which I'm the research lead of, which is what this story came under. We have an environmental team that's doing a lot of great work. We have people who look into kind of extreme online ideologies, and any kind of topic we can cover with open source methods will do. We also teach our techniques to people via online workshops and in-person workshops. And we have a Discord community as well. So if anybody's interested in what we do, please visit our website. Please come to the Discord. We're happy to talk to you, and we're happy to pass on some of the methods that we use in our own work.
Thank you very much, Ross. Appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll check it out. It'll be linked in the notes here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your work on this project and everything else that you do.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ben.